Board Member Kalkors. All right, I just have a couple of quick questions and some comments. So, most of the stuff has been touched on by my colleagues. As Board Member Coughlin mentioned, you score low on our LSCMI, our risk assessment tool, so that's important. You're unique in that, of all the Mattis individuals who have come before us, we've only had a couple who have already been transferred to lower security, or as is the position for you, you're waiting for transfer. So that obviously bodes well for you. And it says a lot about the progress that you've made to this point. The other thing that I'm impressed about as it relates to you is most of your work, a majority of your work was done before the Mattis decision came down in January of last year. So that's important. That says a lot about sort of where you were at in terms of your motivation level, and obviously it started very, very early, and I think your first accomplishment was the GED.
Yes.
All right, and that was back in 1998. Okay. All right, and so, you've taken on leadership positions. That's impressive, to be able to navigate the system in the DOC and the administration and pitch programs and, ideas that you have about how to make the community that you're living in a better place to live. Mr. Poussant, did you learn anything about him at the time of sentencing? We don't have a lot of information about him. I know we have Mr. Richards who's going to be testifying shortly, but
I just know that he had 2 kids. He was married. He had brothers and sisters, and I didn't really know them. And plus, I wasn't from out there, so my family, they didn't know the Poisson family. Okay. So I always inquire sometimes, like, does anybody know their kids? I wonder how they doing. Like, I wonder, how they became in life.
Okay. All right, and I would agree with Board Member Coughlin. The counseling is going to be key for you for adjustment. And it sounds like your dad loves you unconditionally, so if you ask him to go to therapy with you, I'm sure he'll join you. Okay. The other thing that I want to mention as it relates to individuals who are paroled and come back, we talked about the substance abuse, we talked about the relationship issue, but the other thing that's going to jam you up, maybe not initially, but it'll catch up to you, is if you're not honest with your parole officer about what's going on. The truth always comes out.
Yep.
So just keep that in mind.
Okay.
All right. So I think that's all I have right now. All right. So we're going to hear from your supporters. I'm going to ask you to take a seat right over here.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, please. I'd like to ask Dr. Emily Brown to come forward.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And I'm just going to, before everybody starts to testify, we try to keep it in 5 minutes if we
Yes.
can.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So just to introduce myself, my name is Emily Brown. I'm a licensed psychologist in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I was retained by Mr. Dixon's parole attorney to perform a psychological evaluation of him. I interviewed Mr. Dixon twice. I interviewed him for the first time back in August 2024 and then again in February 2025. I also reviewed, extensive records, institutional history, legal history, mental health documents, medical documents. I scored risk assessment measures. I spoke to a member of his family who's in the audience here today. And then I prepared a report of my findings, which I will try to briefly discuss with you guys today. We know that in terms of the Mattis factors, there's a number of different neuropsychological factors that are prominent in emerging adults in that cohort. And for Mr. Dixon, many of which, those factors, many of which were present during the time when he committed the index offense. He was very susceptible to peer influences. He was, overly concerned with how others perceived him at that time. He was just essentially living in the moment and just sort of being a kid, so to speak. He was engaging in risk-taking behaviors. He was engaging in a degree of impulsivity, and he was just more concerned about his immediate circumstances more so than anything about his actual future. in addition to those factors, there are some that were, in addition to those sort of general neuropsychological factors, there were also some factors that were prominent in his kind of upbringing. So we know from what we've heard today that in terms of as a child and sort of early adolescence, he was exposed to a lot of community violence, drugs, prostitution, just violence in general. And so I think in many ways that sort of shaped his early upbringing and just kind of shaped who he was. And then his parents, separated at age 6, and then he ultimately, was brought to New York at age 11, which for him, although he was being brought to a scenario that was better in many ways, it was traumatic for him having left Massachusetts, the place that he had known, leaving his mother. And so that for him, I think, was particularly difficult. And I think it only further exacerbated, the underlying feelings of inadequacy and just having these issues with self-esteem to being sort of like shorter and smaller compared to some of the other kids. And, in my opinion, too, there were other individuals, not everybody, but other males in his life at that time that were reinforcing some of his engagement and some of those negative activities that he was doing. And that just further perpetuated the persona that he was trying to have in terms of being this tough guy. So I think that all of those factors contributed into what ultimately happened on the day that he committed the murder. In terms of clinically, it's been covered, but he doesn't present with, a major mental illness. He doesn't present with substance use issues. He scored low on a measure of psychopathy. In terms of, risk speaking, it's my opinion that he's low risk to, commit any further violence. There's no salient clinical factors at this point in terms of risk management. It's going to be a major adjustment, any type of transition he's going to have to minimum, to possibly the community, and so he'll need support around that. At this point, if he moves to minimum, there aren't as many, moving parts in terms of risk management, but there will be, if he, is paroled to the community at some point. In terms of, it's been covered, but, in the last 32 years, he's had less than 20 disciplinary reports, no violence since 1995. He's demonstrated a high degree of positive adjustment. He has taken upon it himself to engage in all of this programming when there was no, outward purpose in terms of he was going to be released or anything like that. I know that, he put forth this false innocence claim, but to my knowledge and understanding, he revealed all of that, to other individuals within the facility. And in my opinion, it hasn't prevented him from maturing and rehabilitating to a degree that he could be successful. And that was, I believe through looking through the record and also speaking to him that he does have genuine introspection into what happened. He has genuinely rehabilitated and matured to a degree that he could be successful in the community. And so as I stated before, it's my opinion that he's low risk for violent recidivism and that he is an excellent candidate to be transferred to minimum if that ends up happening in the next couple months. And I also, in my opinion, believe that he would be a good candidate, a suitable candidate for parole to the community in the future if that was offered to him.